How did America survive before roads? Forget the easy trips we make today. Before cars, before highways, rivers were the only way to move anything or anyone. But these rivers were wild. They decided who lived and who vanished without a trace. It all came down to a few forgotten skills, secrets passed down that made the difference between life and death. We're about to open that old river book. Number 1. Reading river currents. The rivers weren't open highways, they were obstacle courses. Giant fallen trees called snags lurked just under the surface, ready to tear a hole in a boat's hull. Shifting sandbars could trap a vessel for days. A pilot had to memorize the entire river, every single tree and rock on the bank. This let them read the water's surface to spot the safe, deep channels. But one wrong move was deadly. So what happened when the boat inevitably hit something? Number 2. Navigating by landmarks. With no maps or signs, a pilot's memory was their only GPS. They had to burn an image of the entire river into their brain. Every single bluff, tree, rock, and even woodpile sitting on the bank. This detailed mental map was the only way to find the safe, deep channels and dodge hidden sandbars. One boy never forgot the terrifying sound of a huge steamer grinding its bottom on gravel, a constant reminder of how one tiny mistake could wreck everything. But knowing the river was only half the battle. Number 3, building emergency river shelters. The river was so dangerous, getting stranded was a constant risk. Hidden tree snags could tear a boat's hull open without warning, and shallow sandbars could leave you stuck for days. If you survived a wreck, your only option was the shore. Luckily, the same trees pilots memorized for navigation also provided a ready supply of building materials. People could quickly throw together a simple lean-to, using the forest itself to stay alive until help arrived. But a simple shelter was only step 1. Number 4. Predicting weather from water conditions. Surviving a wreck was one thing, but enduring what came next was another. A sudden storm could turn a bad situation deadly, and pilots had no fancy forecasts. They had to read the river itself. If clear water suddenly turned muddy, it meant heavy rain was falling upstream, and a flash flood could be on its way. They also watched the animals. When birds flew low and headed for shore, it was a sure sign bad weather was rolling in. But even with clear skies, the river had ways of hiding its deadliest threats right below the surface. Number 5. Repairing wooden boats by hand. Those underwater threats meant damage wasn't an if, but a when. The river was littered with hidden logs that could punch a hole right through a wooden hull in an instant. Even getting stuck on a shallow sandbar could strain the boat's frame until it snapped. A tiny leak had to be patched immediately. The crew would quickly stuff the hole with cloth and seal it with hot, sticky pitch to keep from sinking. It was a constant battle just to stay afloat. But keeping the boat in one piece was only half the struggle. Number 6. Finding safe river crossings. Sometimes the only way forward was to get out of the boat and cross the river itself. Without bridges, travelers looked for wide, shallow stretches with gentle, sloping banks. The key was a firm, gravel bottom, not soft mud. You could hear massive steamboats grinding across these same shallow spots at night. In fact, parts of the Mississippi were so shallow, sometimes just 16 inches deep, that the old stories about people wading across were actually true. But finding a shallow spot was a luxury. Sometimes the river didn't just get in your way, it tried to swallow the whole landscape. Number 7. Fishing with simple handlines. When you were stranded, the very river that wrecked you was also your best chance for a meal. Travelers relied on a simple kit, just a line, a hook, and a small rock for a weight. You didn't need a fancy pole. Bait was whatever you could dig up on the riverbank. Grubs, worms, or insects. This basic setup, often just wrapped around a stick, was sometimes the only thing standing between a person and starvation. But finding food was just one part of survival. Next, you had to find water that wouldn't kill you. Number 8. Preserving food. During long journeys, catching a fish was one thing, but making it last was another. On a long river trip with no refrigeration, fresh food would spoil in a day. So travelers relied on ancient techniques. They packed heavily salted meats like pork and beef, which could last for months. Anything they caught could be smoked over a fire or dried on the boat's deck. These methods were crucial between the small towns where they could restock. but all the salted food in the world made you incredibly thirsty. Number 9. Loading cargo for balance and stability. On a river full of currents and hidden dangers, a poorly loaded boat wasn't just a problem. It was a death trap. One wrong move and the whole thing could tip over in an instant. Take the early ferries. They were basically long, narrow boxes, so balance was critical. Crews had a system. The heaviest cargo, like wagons, was lined up single file right down the center. Passengers stood at the front and back, keeping the weight perfectly even. It was a simple rule that kept everyone afloat. But once you safely reached the shore, a whole new set of dangers was waiting in the wilderness. Number 10. Starting fires in damp conditions. Out of the boat, the cold, damp forest was the immediate threat. Getting a fire started was non-negotiable, but everything felt soaked. The trick was finding tinder that stayed dry. They'd shave off the inner bark from a birch tree or search for punkwood, that dry, crumbly fungus on dead logs. With a quick strike of flint on steel, they could catch a spark. Gently blowing that tiny ember into a flame was often the most critical survival skill. But fire was useless without clean water. Number 11. Identifying navigable channels. Finding your way through the river meant reading its secrets. The main channel was the only safe path, but it was hidden. Pilots learned to spot the V shape the current makes as it flows over the deepest part. They also knew darker water usually meant it was deep enough, while lighter colors screamed sandbar. But even in the channel, sleepers, logs hidden just below the surface, could rip a hole in a boat in an instant. It was a constant hunt for the safest water. But finding the safe path was one thing, proving you had the right to be on it was another. Number 12. Treating water for drinking. The very river that carried you was also your only source of water, and it was a muddy soup. The first step was just patience. You'd let a bucket of river water sit for hours so all the dirt and silt could settle to the bottom. After carefully pouring off the clearer water, the most important step came next. Boiling it over a fire was the only reliable way to kill the invisible germs that caused deadly diseases like cholera. But clean water couldn't protect you from the dangers waiting on the riverbanks. Number 13. Signaling other boats without technology. On a busy river, you weren't just fighting the current, you were dodging other boats. With no traffic laws, avoiding a collision came down to a simple language of signals. A specific blast from a steam whistle could mean, "I'm passing on your left," while another meant, "I'm holding steady." At night, a waved lantern was the only thing that told another pilot you were there. It was a basic but vital system that prevented total chaos. But knowing the rules of the river was only half the battle. You also had to master the tools of the trade. Number 14. Making rope repairs on the move. Every rope on the boat was a lifeline, and the river was constantly trying to snap it. Hidden logs swayed just under the current or stuck straight up from the riverbed, ready to snag a line at any moment. If a mooring rope broke, the current could sweep the boat away into danger. There was no pulling over to fix it. You had to know how to splice a frayed rope back together right there on the deck before one small problem became a disaster. But what happened when a simple repair wasn't enough and you were completely out of supplies? Number 15. Using river levels to predict flooding. Sometimes the biggest problem wasn't a broken part on your boat, but the entire river breaking its banks. An experienced traveler could see a flood coming just by watching the water. They looked for the telltale signs. Dark water stains high up on the rocks showed how high the river had flooded before. A sudden rush of debris, more logs and branches than usual, was a dead giveaway that a surge was coming. It was an early warning system to find high ground, fast. But even when you could predict the river's behavior, predicting the behavior of other people was a whole different game.